Welcome to Well Read, a program about a little bit of this and a little bit of that at your Ames Public Library. I'm Jerry Hyde, Youth Services Manager at your library, and we're here today to share with you not early literacy, not the books that we have on the shelf or the items that we have for you to use at the library or the meeting rooms or any of the other programs that we have for our little ones and school age kids, but our first with our high school students that we have that have been doing some projects in their classroom and then have brought it to the library to share with our people in our community. So with us today, I have the folks, the teachers at the high school that are the ones that are in charge of these programs and have put our high school students in charge of their own project and showcasing it here in the community. So let's find out who these guys are. So we'll start down here. Ron, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you teach?
Yeah, my name is Ron Shook. I teach a number of things at Ames High School, foundations of biology and earth and space sciences this semester. I also at times have taught chemistry and some of our environmental courses.
All right, and how long have you been at the high school?
I've been at the high school basically since the year 2000.
All right, well, welcome.
Yep.
And Mike.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Todd. I teach biology and physical science this year, and oftentimes I'll teach physics and environmental science and a variety of other courses as well.
And how long have you been at the high school?
And I've been there since 2006.
All right, and last but not least.
I'm Colin Reichert. I teach, luckily enough, just one subject, and that's earth and space science. I've been at the high school 2 years, and I was at the middle school teaching physical science 5 years before that.
All right, so now sometimes when we talk about science, people kind of get a little shy. I mean, what comes to my mind when you said chemistry is my Iowa State chemistry class that kind of scared the heck out of me. But what I have seen, what the three of you have all done, is made science a lot more fun than I remember it being. So tell us, we just got done with what we call a pollinator fair, and can the two of you tell us a little bit about what the pollinator fair and how it came to be and what it is?
I'll start out with just some basic underlying philosophy, and we're very interested in exposing students to authentic projects. So there's a real need to address pollinators. So that's one of the reasons that we've gone down this pathway. And we also want students to do a variety of types of investigations and networking in the community. And Mike, you might have some examples of that type of networking and the overall scope of the project.
Yeah, so we're trying to get them to really learn something, to really take something with them. You know, there's a lot of studies out there that show that, you know, if all you're doing is rote sort of memorization learning, that they're not really picking it up. You know, there's this one study that came out recently that they gave the final exams to the kids 3 months after the course, you know, and the kids come back in the fall, and the average went from a B+ to an F.
Oh,
and
wow.
for us, it's like, well, what's the point? Then it seems like a waste of time. So, you know, we're really concerned about that, and we really want them to take something with it long term. And so we feel like engaging with the material in a way where they're applying it and really getting a lot of depth out of the material is critical. And so these real world projects are, you know, this is where you really learn things, is when you're trying to do it and realizing how complicated it is. And so, yeah, you interact with the community, these professionals, these projects, you're expected to get out and not just do whatever you think, but do what is needed by the community. So every project has to be rooted in community need. You can't just say, I think this is needed. Well, what's your basis for that? You know, you have to actually go out and touch base with the people, you know, working in those fields, working in those areas. What have they done already? What are their needs? And so you're really not just doing whatever you think. And that's kind of how a lot of projects typically are, is I'm just going to do whatever I want. And so we really want them to realize that from a professional perspective, everything is much more complicated than somebody who's not the professional sees it as. And so it makes the projects much more powerful for the community, much more meaningful for the community. And so getting out, figuring out who's doing what is a very complicated first inquiry that those students are active with.
So we're talking sophomores here.
Yep.
Yes.
So how do you start your school year, or do you start it back in ninth grade when start preparing them for it from the summer from ninth grade to 10th grade?
Well, our science department is looking to have students take a project-based approach grade 9 through 12. So in the sense of having some of the skills necessary, they will begin that process in ninth grade. And we also know that they're getting it in the lower grades as well. Early in the semester, we have 2 activities that put students out in nature. So we're lucky enough to have the Ames High School Pole Prairie Preserve right behind us. So we go out, we'll sit quietly for about 10 minutes and journal. What do we see, hear, smell, etc. And we also will go out with our cell phones and take pictures of insects that are out on the plants. Students can then download those pictures on their school computers. We've also planned a field trip each year in coordination with Ryman Gardens, one of our partners, and we get to go out and see what pollinators are visiting their gardens in early September. And then off of that, we'll come back to the classroom and have discussions. And Mike, you may want to pick up on some of those next steps in the process.
Yeah, so I mean, a big inquiry. So a lot of just figuring out what is out there, what's the current situation like. A lot of inquiry into recent headlines, trying to have the kids go out and pick up on what are they hearing, sort of the media reactions are to what's going on, and so that's sort of laying a baseline for sort of what are some of the issues, and obviously the last couple of years we've been focused on pollinators as one of the most pressing issues in biology, and so the next goal would be to what do we do then if we're going to try to make a positive impact on this? What do we do? And so the next step is inquiry into the community. What are our needs? Who's working with this right now? And so a big reaching out to professionals in the community to figure out what can we do, what is there to do, are there things that you wish you could be doing right now but you don't have enough hands on deck? Could we play a role in that somehow?
And Mike, could you just mention the driving question? Because I know that's pretty important in the process too.
Yeah, so project-based learning, a lot of it runs based on a driving question to keep the kids sort of focused on a task at hand. Our driving question the last 2 years has been, what can we as conscious citizens do to make a positive impact on pollinators in our community? So it puts some boundaries on projects and things to try to control that scope a little bit for the kids.
What's some of the things that have surprised you that the students have come back and said, wow, I didn't know this happening, or what is happening in the community that they didn't know was happening in the community? We'll get to you yet.
I think for many of them, for generations, mine included, we've grown up in a landscape that has been heavily changed from the natural habitat that was there since the receding of the last glaciers. And Iowa in particular, the landscape was heavily changed from 1830 to 1900 from a natural prairie and savanna ecosystem to agriculture. So the experiences youngsters have often isn't with native plants, with what that community looked like. So I think a lot of them are surprised at the sheer number of different species. When we go out in the prairie, I think their first reaction is, ooh, I'm being touched by plants and tall grasses. And a few weeks in, after we've had a number of experiences, they start to realize that each plant is special and plays a role, and that there are certain insects going to some plants and not to other plants. And it starts to change the way they look at the world.
Yeah, we've had this Dr. Ptolemy from out east. He put together a book, Bringing Nature Home, and that really, we have a couple copies of that. I think the material from that and a presentation that he lets us use pictures from really, I think, changes the way they see their world. So it's a lot about, he does some experiments where he'll go out to his yard and walk around a tree and count every single caterpillar he finds and what species it is. And so he'll go out and walk around a ginkgo in his neighbor's yard, and the ginkgo has one species and only one caterpillar. Literally nothing living on the tree itself. And then he goes to an oak and he finds, 427 caterpillars of, 27 different species. There's such, and that's just on the bottom. There's such a massive difference in the primary consumer level. It's living off of those producers. And so his big point is, what are these birds eating? So he finds out, he does these chickadee studies and looks back at some chickadee studies, and to raise one clutch of chickadees, just one nest of chickadees in one season, takes between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars.
Wow.
And if they don't have those chicks die. And so he says, if you had a bunch of ginkgos in your yard and other non-native trees, they're not going to live. And so if you have oaks and maples and other sorts of and other native trees, then they will live. And that's, I think, shocking to the kids. Like, what? I never realized that before, that was really a part of native plants versus non-native plants. And so to support these pollinators, we oftentimes hear pollinator gardens. Lowe's, you go to Lowe's, the pollinator garden, it's just all these flowers. And of course, the adults will drink out of any flower, but the offspring, the larvae that are going to produce more adults, they can only eat specific plants. And I think the statistic that's even shocking to me when I first heard it was 90% of insects are host specialists. So 90% of insects need a specific plant. People see the monarch and realize, they need milkweed, or else their caterpillars won't live, and they won't see adult milkweed or adult monarchs. That's normal to us, but we think, that's kind of like the oddball. That's the rule rather than the exception.
Wow.
So that's how 90% of insects are. They need specific plants. And so if we don't have specific plants, and usually the ones that are native here are the ones they evolved with, then we're not gonna see those things long term. We maybe let the adults drink for a year, right, or when they're around, but they're not going to reproduce. You're not going to see more numbers.
And that was part of the inspiration for me. Like, idealistically, I'd always agreed with some of the philosophy of education that students need to be active citizens in the community, but it stayed kind of theoretical, I think, in my practice, even though I had some attempts at trying to get out there and do real stuff. But here I had a model of what it's actually like, what it takes to do this. I'm still nowhere near the level of what the biology teachers are doing in terms of this pollinator project, but we're getting started with stuff like that and serving community needs and trying to fill those. But it's real impact. And when I see students, last year for the first time, I had students create like erosion control structures behind the high school, and they take pride in it. Like, I created that thing there, and it's still there, and it's still serving a purpose and doing good for our watershed. This
is a very nice transition to your project. So this is an established project that's been going on for 2 or 3 years. 3 years. So yours is a fairly new project, but it isn't about pollinator gardens. It's about...
well, with the Earth and Space Science curriculum, a big part of our curriculum goes into human use of natural resources and the environmental consequences of that use. Specifically, one that's really relevant in today's political climate is climate change caused by humans. So we go through the physical science basis for climate change, how we know we can attribute it to humans, at least some of the initial science for that. And some of the projects that students pick from could be related to doing something about climate change, if that's something you're passionate about. But we also learn about how we've been using soil and water, how that's managed in an urban environment versus a rural environment, depending on what kind of land use practices we have, and then doing projects related to land use practices in Iowa.
So what kind of, how does your students start out then with their semester?
So different to what these guys do, which I want to do more of that. So instead of serving the community, which I haven't done, I'm still establishing networks. So they go out and survey the community to figure out a need, and then everything's based around that need. Like, here's something real that's happening in the community, and all the biology curriculum we can tie into that need, in this case, pollinator. And so I'm not to that point yet. So instead, the way I'm approaching this, I teach them the science, and then they have to creatively on their own figure out how to apply this, find some environmental need. And I give them ideas, but it could be something as small as impacting the way your household's using energy. to as large as I have some students that are trying to raise awareness of these energy packets that are being sold by the City of Ames for SunSmart Ames. So this initiative to provide more solar power to the city. So it's kind of a range of topics as opposed to focused on one and having a really broad impact with this one topic.
I just want to say Colin's very modest, and he does outstanding work. And one of the things I like about your project, and I tag along with you on it, is you do ask students to go home and see how they can apply the knowledge from class into their own lives. And I think that's a really nice way to approach it with students as well. So just want to validate that for you.
Well, it sounds like to me all three of you are doing outstanding work in our high school, and I'm not sure that our public or our community always knows unless you're directly related to a student that's going through your class. I know I've been amazed the different years that I've gone from little station to station as to what the students have learned and what they're teaching me as a student, student teaching adult, and versus a teacher, a librarian is supposed to know lots of things, right? I mean, I know how to get to the books, but the content is what these students are sharing, and also sharing what's in the community that I didn't know. And I love it when our community comes in and sees our youth, our teens, taking care of that and taking care of that citizenship of the world in their hands, and citizenship here in Ames, learning all those things. And they need good mentors and guide along the way. So tell us a little bit about, we kind of mentioned the different stations. How do they get to that point? I mean, there also are groups. So how do you assign the different groups to do the different stations that they're sharing? I mean, do I just fall in love with the butterfly at the Ryman Gardens and say, I want to do this?
It's
And
a variety of different ways we can do it. We do it differently sort of each semester, but for our project this semester we pick groups, and then they sort of find a common interest based on their thinking. And so they rank a bunch of ideas that the class comes up with that they want to sort of go out and explore the
so
possibility
it's kind
of
of
the
a
feasibility
big
study.
brainstorm.
Yeah,
type of
a
We
lot of
do
conversation.
several brainstorms on what do we think people in the community need to know to understand how to have an impact on things. And then they sort of latch on to a particular one of those. We also invite in guest speakers, and it's a great connection with Iowa State University. So we've had people from the evolutionary biology group, people from the horticulture group come out, young grad students who are out actually surveying the native bees or working on things like colony collapse disorder in honeybees. And so we start to get that next level where at least some of these students could possibly be gravitating in the future. And so I think that's also an important thing that's in the mix.
So they have kind of a narrower focus. Yours is like the whole world.
It's pretty broad.
So
yeah.
how do you get your students narrowed down to a topic for a station to share to the community, with the community?
Right. So some of this is how we define community can vary, and I think they're very much focused on local community, which is fantastic. And so some of the projects that my students pick could be relevant to the community, but given the political changes recently, especially with what's been enacted by Director Scott Pruitt at the EPA, there's a lot of students who, through their own motivation, see issue with that. And so they pick a political approach to, like, well, I want to do something related to addressing how our nation's dealing with climate change. So they take political action. Some of them are contacting representatives or Scott Pruitt about energy policy in the United States. And then some of them, as I pointed out earlier, are doing things right here in the community, changing things in their house, trying to provide services, education opportunities for people in the community, or helping with a project that's already in the works in the community, like the SunSmart Ames.
So I can see what happens in the community on your part. Well, federally, how are the positive reactions or negative reaction? I mean, what do they hear back?
So their letters, for a lot of them, it's the first time they've ever sent a letter like this. And so they need a lot of work in improving the quality of the letter and what's being demanded. But I typically ask them, like, if you want a response, make sure that you include a response. But we have had students who've gotten responses back from representatives.
And now, is this email, snail mail?
I'm a fan of the snail mail thing, so I do have students who do that, put it in an envelope, and they drop it in there. For a lot of them, it's the first time sending a communication like that.
That's right.
But some of them do the email approach too. So
Yeah.
the important thing is making contact.
So we just had a program for our little ones about Write With Me, and that's what we did, was write letters. And it made me think about how many of them didn't know what an envelope was. It's just like, wow, okay.
And that's why we're doing these projects, because the real learning that happens is not only in the content area, but it's all these other things. You know, the communication aspect of this is huge. Talking with people in person, talking with people on the phone, emailing people. I'd say 99.9% of kids are not very good at those sorts of things when they start writing things for us and for their collaborators. And so that's been the powerful thing to us. And I even read off one of the collaborators that one of the groups was working with this semester wrote me a nice email and said, and I read it to all the classes, and I said, guys, this is why we're working on this. And she said, you know, I've never worked with students who wrote emails like your students do. And I said, well, I was thinking in my head, well, because we spend a lot of time, you know, with them, helping them craft these, and they draft them, and we give them feedback. And she said, you know, I work with ISU students, I work with lots of high school students, I work with lots of adults, and these students and their email really are the reason why I was very excited to collaborate with them, and I think it helped the kids see that there was power in learning lots of things along with biology in a class, because it would open doors or close doors for them. I mean, a lot of times our communications with people can have a lot of impact on our lives and what opportunities are open to us. So,
Well, I am just amazed at what our high school science department is doing for our children, our students, our teens, our young adults, whatever we want to call this fantastic, lucky group of students that are going through the high school at this time. So I want to personally thank you for my own reasons, personal, and also from the community for helping make it such an impact in our community, because it is awesome. And I have some grandchildren coming your way, so I can't wait until I see their reactions of what they learn from all of you. So you have to stay, okay? But anyway, it is a power. Teaching is powerful. Learning is powerful. Real life experiences are powerful. So these young students that are going through our Ames High School right at this moment are getting some powerful experiences and abilities that they will be able to take out into our community, whether it's here in Ames or in Iowa or federally across the nation, and possibly even worldwide. So thank you all for coming and sharing your projects, and thank you all for watching, and call your high school and tell them what a great job these scientists are doing, so, and the students. Until next time, happy reading, and go outside and look for those insects.